You can't sit here. That seat's for the dog.
They stripped his dignity in front of everyone, laughed at his clothes, handed him an apron. But when Queen Letizia walked in, the laughter died, and reputations began to burn. Before we continue this story, tell us where in the world are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Royal Humanitarian Gala, Palacio Real, Madrid. The cobblestones glistened beneath the soft lights of the Palacio Real. Luxury sedans lined the grand front gate, their doors swinging open as men in tailored tuxedos and women in flowing gowns stepped into the night like gods descending from clouds of perfume and flashbulbs. But one man walked in, alone, no entourage. No designer label shimmering across his chest. His boots were clean, but scuffed. His charcoal gray jacket was neat, but lived in, the kind that remembered a decade of stories. He paused by the gate, checked the creased paper invitation in his hand, an old-school envelope sealed in gold. His name printed plainly, Charles Reeves. A young valet approached. "Sir, may I take your coat?" Before he could respond, a voice sliced through the air like crystal cracking under pressure. Excuse me, this entrance is for invited guests only." She wore blood-red heels and a midnight blue gown that screamed curated elegance. Her hair was pulled into a perfect French twist, her lips painted like precision. Isabelle Marceau, director of protocol, and a self-declared guardian of image. She didn't glance at the envelope. She looked straight at him. "You're with catering?" she said, stepping closer. "Please use the staff entrance at the west courtyard." Keanu, still going by Charles, offered a soft smile. "Actually, I think there's a seat for me here. I was invited." She arched one perfectly drawn brow. "That's unlikely." He handed her the envelope. She snatched it, flicked it open, and scanned the name. Her lips twitched. Was it a surprise? Disgust? Charles Reeves? No title? No company? No foundation? She looked back up. "I see. One of those invites." He didn't flinch, just nodded. "I'm here to listen," he said simply. Isabelle gave a tight smile, one honed to sliced bone. "I'm sure you mean well, but this is not a place for passive observers. It's a night of legacy builders, influencers, people who understand scale." She motioned to a staff member behind her. "Rodrigo, please direct Mr. Reeves to the back-tier seating. Make sure he's comfortable, far from the cameras." Keanu didn't resist. As he followed the usher through a side corridor, he passed by tables draped in gold, lit from beneath by chandeliers like upside-down suns. Guests posed with flutes of Dom Perignon, cameras flashing, laughter ricocheting off marble walls. No one looked at him. No one asked his name. But he saw everything. How Isabelle leaned close to a billionaire's ear and laughed too loudly. How she redirected a young violinist away from a VIP path. How the gala gleamed on the surface and rotted underneath. He walked past it all and entered a narrow hall behind the catering station. No fanfare, no welcome, just the sound of pots clanging in the distance. He didn't mind, because sometimes it's the quiet places where revolutions begin. Palacio Real, 7:46 p.m. The chair creaked when he sat. Not the kind of elegant creak you'd expect in a royal palace, but a dry, tired groan, like it had been borrowed from the break room and polished just enough to pass as presentable. The tablecloth was thin, off-white, and fraying along the edges. There were no candles, no centerpieces, no wine. Just a half-filled pitcher of lukewarm water and a stack of mismatched glasses that looked like they came from 3 different dish sets. Keanu glanced around. His table sat tucked behind a gilded column, barely in view of the main ballroom. On one side was a narrow service corridor where waiters whisked in and out with trays of hors d'oeuvres. On the other, a steel door labeled Kitchen, Staff Only, with a strip of duct tape holding the handle together. Across from him sat an elderly man in a faded suit with soup stains on the cuffs. Beside him, a young girl nervously adjusted the hem of her plain black dress, clearly borrowing it for the night. No one spoke. No one smiled. No one looked up. This was the overflow. The forgotten invitees. The guests who didn't sparkle enough to sit near royalty, or sponsor enough to be seated at tables 1 through 10. Keanu had been given table 26, the last in the sequence. A printed sign said so, curling slightly from the heat of the nearby kitchen door. A clatter to his left. A silver tray tipped. A waiter stumbled. A woman gasped. Keanu instinctively moved, catching a falling flute of sparkling water before it shattered. "Nice reflexes," the waiter muttered, slightly embarrassed. But before Keanu could reply, someone approached, heels clicking, clipboard in hand. Isabelle. "Still here?" she asked, feigning surprise. "I was told you'd left." "I found my table," Keanu replied, voice calm. She glanced at the group seated around him and gave a short, controlled laugh. "Ah, yes, the quiet zone." She leaned closer, lowered her voice. "We often need space for miscellaneous guests, unattached, unaffiliated, unremarkable. But don't worry, you'll still get a meal." She turned on her heel, but paused. Then, for flair, she added, "Oh, and if someone asks you to bring them a drink, just smile and nod. That's how you'll fit in here." He said nothing, but his eyes, sharp and still, followed her as she melted back into the crowd. Moments later, a woman in a green satin gown approached, barely glancing at him. Could you get me a glass of rosé?" she asked. Keanu blinked. "Sorry?" She furrowed her brow. "You're catering, right?" Before he could answer, she scoffed, turned, and walked off. Laughter erupted nearby. Not cruel, just casual, dismissive. He sat back in his seat, the shadows of the column stretching long across the floor. In a palace filled with chandeliers and polished marble, no one had asked him why he was there. Not yet. Palazzo Real, 8:15 p.m. The staff hallway buzzed with the rhythm of organized chaos. Silver trays clattered, champagne bottles hissed open, and waiters whispered names of dignitaries like military code. Somewhere beyond the curtain of noise and fragrance, the gala sparkled on in full swing. Keanu stood quietly near the service counter, adjusting the folded napkin under his water glass. His table, if it could still be called that, had grown colder. The other guests barely spoke, and he didn't blame them. The clinking elegance of the main room was worlds away from here. He watched a waiter, barely older than Sophie, his niece, nearly trip over a catering crate while balancing a flaming dessert. Keanu stepped forward instinctively, steadying the tray before it tipped. "Gracias," the boy whispered, then vanished again into the golden light. "You're very helpful tonight," came a smooth voice behind him. Keanu turned. Isabelle Marceau stood holding something in both hands. Not a tray, not a drink, a black apron. She held it out like a medal, but her smirk betrayed the message underneath. "I've had 3 spills in 10 minutes, she said. "Short-staffed, clearly. Since you're already lingering near the kitchen, would you mind?" She didn't wait for an answer. She simply stepped forward and draped the apron across his arm. For a second, Keanu said nothing, just looked at her. She stared back, smiling, as if daring him to refuse. Around them, the hallway slowed. A few servers glanced over, half curious, half concerned. One of them, an older woman with tired eyes, shook her head ever so slightly at Isabelle, then quickly looked away. "You seem like the type who doesn't mind doing what needs to be done," Isabelle said sweetly, pinning the apron strap around his neck. It was snug, warm from her hands, and humiliatingly symbolic. "Looks good on you," she added. Then she walked off, heels clicking in victorious rhythm. A few guests from a neighboring table peeked into the hallway, noticed him, then whispered and laughed. One raised a phone, pretending to check messages, but angling it to get a photo. Click. Keanu exhaled slowly. He didn't remove the apron. Not yet. Instead, he turned back toward the kitchen, helped a passing waiter gather fallen utensils, and guided a hot tray past a loose power cord. If they were going to mistake him for staff, he might as well make sure no one else got hurt. In the background, the main ballroom's music swelled. A jazz quartet began playing something soft, something sentimental. Through a narrow gap in the curtain, Keanu saw Isabelle, already laughing with a venture capitalist and a wine heiress, both of whom were raising glasses to something he couldn't hear. The light beyond was golden, but the air here smelled like grease, steel, and burnt citrus. Still wearing the apron, Keanu stepped back into the shadows. He didn't need to explain himself. Not yet. Palazzo Real, 8:42 p.m. The ballroom lights dimmed slightly as dinner service approached. Waiters glided like clockwork across the marble floor, and the scent of seared lamb and saffron rice drifted into the air. Guests returned to their seats, clinking glasses and straightening their collars for the upcoming honor segment. Each table buzzed with excitement, everyone hoping to be seen, to be named, to be photographed. Keanu made his way back toward his seat, still wearing the black apron. He had just finished helping an elderly man find the restroom, another moment where someone assumed he was part of the waitstaff. He didn't correct them. He hadn't corrected anyone all evening. But when he returned to his modest table near the staff corridor, something was wrong. His seat was gone. Not empty. Gone. In its place sat a small velvet ottoman, covered in embroidered gold fabric. A luxury dog bed. On it, curled in royal indifference, was a snow-white Maltese, wearing a diamond-studded collar that probably cost more than a car. Standing nearby, gently brushing white fur off her crimson silk gown, was Contessa del Vecchio, an Italian socialite known more for her scandals than her philanthropy. She dabbed the corners of her lips with a napkin, then looked over at Keanu like he was a misplaced lamp. "Ah," she said, gesturing. "Please don't disturb him. He just settled in." Keanu blinked. "Sorry, this was my seat." The Contessa raised a perfectly plucked brow, That seat, she said slowly, was reassigned. My Dante needs somewhere soft for his back. She turned to sip her wine, ending the conversation. Before Keanu could speak again, Isabelle Marceau appeared. Of course. "Oh, Mr. Reeves," she said, drawing out the syllables like a sigh. "We had to make a last-minute adjustment. I'm sure you understand. Contessa is one of our top donors." She leaned closer, voice low but slicing. "Besides, you seemed more comfortable standing." A few nearby guests chuckled quietly. Someone at table 9 lifted their phone and snapped a picture. Keanu, still in an apron, being displaced by a dog. Isabelle gave him a pat on the arm, as if rewarding him for obedience. "There's a bench near the hallway," she added. "More appropriate." Keanu looked down at the dog, then at the ornate ballroom. Chandeliers sparkled, glasses shimmered, the illusion of nobility gleamed, and somewhere in the distance a string quartet played the opening notes of Clair de Lune. He didn't argue. He didn't demand his seat back. Instead, Keanu turned silently and walked to the far wall, where a wooden bench rested near a fire extinguisher and a forgotten bucket of melting ice. He sat, out of the frame, out of the story. Or so they thought. Because as the Queen's motorcade approached the palace gates, every moment of cruelty was already being noticed, and the cameras they'd used to humiliate him would soon capture their fall. Are you still here? If you love Keanu Reeves and the powerful acts of kindness he's known for, comment the number 8 to let us know you're with us. Palazzo Real, 9:03 p.m. The chandeliers above table 1 shimmered like frozen fire, casting a golden glow on every diamond necklace and hand-tailored tuxedo below. The main course had been cleared. Dessert was being plated. And now came the moment everyone had dressed for. The recognition speeches, the part of the gala where wealth met virtue, where donors became saints in silk. Isabelle Marceau stood behind the crystal lectern, spine straight, smile sharpened to perfection. She tapped the microphone once. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice smooth and practiced. "Tonight is more than opulence. It is about honoring those who give, who build, who shape the world." Polite applause rippled through the room. Cameras were already rolling. Keanu sat at the bench near the staff corridor, still visible in the far right corner if anyone cared to look, which, of course, they didn't. Isabelle continued. "We've heard of titans, those who donate millions, who stand beside presidents and kings, but let's not forget the quiet ones." She glanced sideways toward the outer edge of the ballroom. The ones who serve quietly, who keep to the shadows, who know their place. The crowd chuckled. Keanu didn't move. He simply looked down at the black apron still folded in his lap. No longer wearing it. Just holding it. Isabelle raised her champagne flute. "A toast," she said, voice rising. "To those who pour the drinks, pass the plates, and stay out of the spotlight. Let them be celebrated. Briefly." Laughter. A few awkward claps. And then she locked eyes with Keanu, far across the ballroom. A slight tilt of the head. A smirk that said, "You see what I did there?" Keanu blinked slowly. One might have thought he didn't react at all, until you saw his fingers tighten slightly around the apron in his lap. From somewhere near the back, a well-meaning guest whispered, Who is he, anyway? The answer floated back like a dart. No one is important. Probably a last-minute fill-in. Waiters began to pour refills as dessert arrived. A caramelized pear with vanilla foam. Light, delicate, intentionally forgettable. Keanu took a breath. He was used to being underestimated. Dismissed. Misread. But this wasn't just about him anymore. He'd watched Isabelle all evening. How she corrected a server's pronunciation loud enough to humiliate him. How she physically shifted a woman in a wheelchair to improve the symmetry of the seating chart. How she had turned this gala into a theater of cruelty dressed in velvet and gold. He looked up again. Isabelle had moved on, now introducing a tech billionaire as the hero of the hour. Cameras flashed, applause roared, but none of them noticed the distant sound outside the palace. The motorcade gliding through the gates, the final guest's arrival. He folded the apron once, set it beside him on the bench, and waited. Because the next name to be honored wouldn't come from Isabelle's script. It would come from the Queen. Palazzo Real, 9:18 p.m. The music stopped. A hush fell over the ballroom, not planned, not rehearsed, but instinctual. Something in the air shifted. Forks froze mid-air. Laughter died mid-sentence. At the grand entrance, 2 palace guards stepped aside. And through the towering gilded doors, flanked by velvet drapes and silent tension, Queen Letizia entered. No trumpets. No formal announcement. Just presence. She moved with purpose, elegant, direct, her silver gown flowing like liquid light, the royal seal of Spain pinned discreetly to her left shoulder. Everyone stood. Cameras pivoted. Isabelle Marceau straightened herself at the podium, ready for the perfect curtsy, the perfect photo op. But the Queen didn't even glance at her. She didn't stop at table 1, didn't shake hands with the ambassador, didn't wave at the royal cousins. She walked straight through the crowd, eyes fixed across the room, toward the shadows, toward the bench, toward him. Keanu Reeves stood slowly. No fanfare, no confusion. He knew this moment was coming. Queen Letizia stopped in front of him, looked at the black apron folded beside him, then met his eyes. Her voice was gentle, but every syllable echoed like thunder through marble. "Senor Reeves, why are you sitting here?" The crowd collectively inhaled. A few gasps, a clatter of a dessert fork hitting the floor. Isabelle's face turned the color of cold porcelain. Keanu answered with quiet calm. "I was told this was the appropriate seat." The Queen's expression softened, but there was steel beneath it. She reached down, and with both hands, picked up the black apron lying beside him, held it up so the crowd could see, then turned toward the room. "This was not the seat I chose for him." Whispers exploded. Recognition finally bloomed across the faces of guests. A name passed through lips like lightning. Keanu Reeves. "Elector, what's he doing? Is that him?" The Queen continued. "This man, whom many of you overlooked, mocked, or used for your amusement, has quietly donated over 7 million euros to Spanish refugee hospitals, veterans shelters, and children's burn units. He refused to be named, refused headlines. He came here tonight not to be seen, but to see if we were still worth standing beside." Silence. true silence. Even the quartet in the corner had frozen mid-measure. Letizia turned back to Keanu. "You were never meant to sit in the shadows." Then, in front of 300 of the most powerful people in Europe, she offered him her arm, not as royalty, as a peer. He took it, and together they walked toward the front of the ballroom, past Isabelle, past every polished boot and sneering lip. Some applauded, some lowered their heads, some simply stared, ashamed. But none of them would forget what they'd just seen, because in that single walk across the room, the man they dismissed as a nobody became the measure by which they'd all be judged. Palazzo Real, 9:27 p.m. Isabelle Marceau stood frozen at the podium, her knuckles white around the crystal stem of her untouched champagne flute. The Queen and Keanu Reeves were now seated side by side at the head table, her head table, a place she had once deemed too sacred even for visiting dignitaries. Her ears rang, but not from applause, from silence. Dead, condemning. The audience didn't cheer when the Queen sat. They processed. Faces turned pale, eyes darted. Whispers swelled like a virus across the ballroom. She gave him the seat of honor. He's not just a guest, he's the guest. Wait, didn't Isabelle make him wear an apron? Oh my God, she made him sit behind the kitchen, and then came the phones. In this room of influencers, billionaires, and legacy seekers, optics were oxygen, and right now Isabelle was choking. Someone had posted the image already. Keanu Reeves in a black apron, standing behind a dog on a throne. Underneath, "This is how the Royal Gala treated a global humanitarian." Hashtag #ApronGate. Within seconds, it was being shared, reshared, commented on. Even gala staff, hiding behind serving trays, were checking their phones, eyes wide. One of the Queen's personal aides approached Isabelle quietly from the side. "Ma'am, Her Majesty would like to finish the evening without your continued assistance." Isabelle blinked. "Excuse me?" "She's asked that you step down from your hosting duties. Permanently." The word permanently landed like glass in her throat. Behind her, the palace media team was already rearranging the backdrop. The PR director was whispering to reporters. The Queen will speak directly now. No more scripted remarks. Isabelle stepped back, dazed. She reached for a chair. Any chair. But they were no longer hers. Even the podium had subtly shifted under new control. She turned to leave, but froze when she saw the screen mounted above the dance floor. A clip was playing on loop. Footage from earlier that night. Grainy but unmistakable. Isabelle pinning a black apron around Keanu's neck. Keanu nodded politely, her smug half-smile. A wave of murmurs swept through the crowd like judgment with heels. Within minutes, her name began trending. Marceau, royal, humiliation. He deserved better. An executive from a luxury fashion brand whispered, "We need to cut ties before this spreads to our donors." A telecom CEO texted his assistant, "Rescind next week's lunch with Marceau. Risk is too high." Her empire, built on reputation, polish, and perception, was disintegrating like sugar in hot tea. She turned for the exit, but just before she disappeared behind the velvet curtain, she made the mistake of glancing back. There sat the man in the gray coat, now lit by chandeliers, now addressed as Senor Reeves. He wasn't gloating. He wasn't even looking at her. He was listening to a refugee doctor speak at the Queen's request. And that, somehow, made it worse. Because he hadn't destroyed her. She had done it to herself. Palazzo Real, 9:45 p.m. The ballroom looked different now. The chandeliers still sparkled. The music still played. Soft piano now, reverent and steady. But the mood had shifted from spectacle to soul. Vanity had left the building. Keanu Reeves sat beside Queen Letizia, no longer in shadows, no longer mistaken. He wasn't wearing the black apron anymore. It rested on the table in front of him, folded neatly, deliberately, like a flag lowered after battle. Across the room, every camera lens pointed toward him, but he wasn't giving them what they expected. No righteous monologue, no retaliation, no takedown. Just silence. Until the Queen stood and offered him the mic. Keanu rose, slowly. The room held its breath. He looked across faces once filled with judgment, now shadowed with guilt, awe, or both. He saw donors, celebrities, politicians, the world's important people, waiting for him to speak, and then he did. "I came here tonight for one reason," he said, voice calm but resolute, to see if kindness still had a seat at the table. There was no anger, only clarity. "I didn't need attention. I didn't want applause. But I hoped, quietly, that maybe, just maybe, humility still mattered in rooms like this." He glanced down at the apron, then back at the crowd. "You judged a man by the wear on his shoes. You measured worth by who he walked in with. But true service isn't loud. It doesn't wear a tuxedo. It doesn't demand to be seen." A woman in the second row wiped her eyes. A man near the buffet bowed his head. "Tonight, I was mocked, pushed aside, dressed like staff so others could feel taller. But I'm not the one who should be ashamed." He paused. "Because what happened here tonight happens everywhere. In boardrooms, on red carpets, at dinner tables where someone's name isn't remembered, or never asked at all." He stepped forward, eyes locked on no one and everyone. "So let me ask you this. When was the last time you gave someone dignity, before you knew their title? When did you last listen to the quietest person in the room?" The silence that followed was heavier than applause. Keanu set the mic down. Not dropped. Not slammed. Placed. And then he walked away from the spotlight. The Queen stood, applauded once, and soon the room followed. Not with thunder, not with performance, but with something slower, heavier, real, and now to you, watching this story unfold. If you've ever been dismissed, underestimated, or treated like background noise in someone else's spotlight, this story is for you. But more importantly, ask yourself, would you have noticed him? Would you have offered your seat or taken his away? Let us know in the comments below. And if you believe kindness still belongs in rooms of power, type yes below. Because one small act of respect might be the moment the whole room turns.